It started like any ordinary press briefing: bright lights, a calm podium, the hum of journalists ready to ask routine questions. But what unfolded next would leave Washington spinning, the internet on fire, and millions of viewers wondering, did she really just say that? Karoline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, was supposed to represent strength, professionalism, and the voice of leadership. Yet, in one moment, that image collapsed into chaos. It began with a simple question, one any official could have answered with dignity. But instead of a careful, measured response, Karoline's reply detonated like a grenade across social media. "Your mom did." 2 words. That's all it took. And suddenly the room fell silent. Reporters blinked, unsure if they had misheard. Within seconds, the clip was everywhere, screens lighting up with disbelief. Tweets exploded. News anchors stuttered live on air, trying to process what had just happened. A line so childish, so dripping with sarcasm, felt impossible that it came from the most powerful podium in the world. But this wasn't just an awkward moment. It was a breakdown, a crack in the facade of professionalism. Because that line didn't come from an influencer or a comedian. It came from the voice of the White House, the question that triggered it all. A fair, factual one. But instead of facts, America got mockery. Instead of clarity, it got chaos. And as the internet lost its mind, one truth became painfully clear. This was no longer about politics. It was about how far public respect had fallen. Something deeper was unraveling here, and by the time the world realized it, the damage was already done. Asterisk, to understand why that moment hit so hard, you have to know what the question was about. It wasn't random. It wasn't a trick. It was about a place, Budapest. When President Trump announced he'd be meeting Vladimir Putin there, the world didn't just raise eyebrows, it froze. Because Budapest isn't just another European capital. It's a city layered with history, promises, and broken trust. Back in 1994, it was the site of the Budapest Memorandum, a peace agreement that was supposed to change everything. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Ukraine had inherited one of the largest nuclear arsenals in the world, thousands of weapons capable of mass destruction. But in a rare act of faith, Ukraine agreed to give them up. In return, Russia, the United States, and the United Kingdom promised to protect Ukraine's independence and borders. It was a moment of hope, the world stepping toward peace. But decades later, that promise would be shattered. Putin invaded Crimea in 2014, breaking the very agreement signed in that city. Then, in 2022, his full-scale invasion of Ukraine tore the world open again. Cities burned, families fled, and the name Budapest turned bitter in history's mouth. So when a journalist asked why Budapest, it wasn't just curiosity, it was symbolism. It was a question that deserved care, dignity, and depth. Because every Ukrainian who lost a home, every child who heard sirens in the night, they knew what Budapest meant. And yet, instead of acknowledgement or empathy, came those 2 mocking words, "Your mom did." In that instant, the entire weight of history collided with sarcasm. And what could have been a respectful dialogue turned into a global embarrassment. Asterisk, the question landed gently. The kind any press secretary could handle with grace. Why Budapest? Simple, direct, a request for clarity. But Karoline Leavitt's response wasn't just unexpected, it was unthinkable. "Your mom did." 2 words that tore through the quiet professionalism of the White House press room like a thunderclap. At first, no one moved. Reporters looked at each other, eyebrows raised, half expecting her to laugh, to correct herself, to say she'd been misquoted. But there was no correction, no apology, just silence, the kind that stretches too long, heavy with disbelief. And then everything erupted. Within minutes, screenshots of her email flooded social media. Headlines screamed across every platform. Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube lit up with disbelief and outrage. Did the White House really just say that? One user posted. Another wrote, "This can't be real. Please tell me this is a parody." But it wasn't. Newsrooms scrambled. Late-night hosts sharpened their jokes. Commentators argued live on air about decorum, respect, and the crumbling boundaries of professionalism. The moment had gone viral, but not in the way any administration wants, because that one sarcastic phrase didn't just offend journalists. It undermined the very idea of serious communication between power and the people. It turned diplomacy into mockery and truth into entertainment. For a generation that already doubts its leaders, this became proof that even in the White House, maturity could lose to meme culture. And as the story spread, people weren't just laughing. They were angry. Angry that something so small could expose something so big, a system that no longer seemed to take itself seriously. Asterisk. What made Karoline Leavitt's "Your Mom Did" response truly shocking wasn't just the words, it was what they represented. It wasn't a joke. It was a mirror. A reflection of how far political discourse in America has fallen. That email wasn't sent from a teenager's bedroom. It came from the highest office in the land, the place meant to set the tone for leadership, diplomacy, and respect. But instead of addressing a question tied to one of the most painful chapters in global history, the White House's response sounded more like a social media clapback. And that's where the real story begins. Because this wasn't just about a bad reply, it was about standards collapsing. The Budapest Memorandum was supposed to be a symbol of trust and stability. Now, that same city's name is tangled in mockery and scandal. It's as if history itself is being disrespected. Think about it. The same document that once protected peace between nations is now being overshadowed by a sarcastic joke. The same voice that should have carried calm and confidence turned into a punchline. And while the internet laughed, something deeper began to crack. Faith in professionalism, in accountability. In the very idea that leadership still means something, people no longer see this as a single incident. They see it as part of a pattern where power hides behind snark and truth becomes entertainment. Because when leaders mock instead of answer, trust dies quietly. The question wasn't just why Budapest, it was why mock the truth. And as the dust settled, one thing became painfully clear. The real damage wasn't in the insult. It was in what it revealed about the heart of modern leadership. Asterisk, when the shock faded. The silence that followed was deafening. Washington had seen scandals before, plenty of them, but this felt different. It wasn't corruption. It wasn't crime. It was disrespect, raw and unfiltered, from the very seat of power. And that made it sting more than anything else. Within hours, the internet transformed into a battlefield. Journalists who'd spent decades covering the White House said they'd never seen anything like it. One veteran reporter wrote, "In all my years, I've never received a reply from a government official that sounded like a middle school insult." News networks replayed the clip on a loop, dissecting every frame, every word. Political panels grew heated, voices rising as one question hung in the air: how did we get here? For ordinary citizens, it became a symbol of something bigger, a growing frustration that the people meant to lead were now the ones fueling division. It wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about tone, respect, and the slow decay of seriousness in a world obsessed with sound bites. And while Karoline Leavitt's defenders tried to spin it as sarcasm, the public wasn't buying it. The damage was already done. Memes flooded timelines late at night. Comedians turned it into a punchline. The once formal White House press office became the center of ridicule. But behind the laughter was something heavier: disappointment. Because this wasn't just a PR mistake. It was a moment that made people question if leadership still understood what leadership means. Diplomacy had turned into mockery. Professionalism had turned into performance. In Budapest, the city whose name carried both history and heartbreak, people watched from afar, the irony not lost on them. The same city that once symbolized hope and peace was now linked to arrogance and immaturity. By the end of the week, the internet's laughter had cooled into something colder reflection. Maybe the real scandal wasn't the insult itself. Maybe it was the reminder that the world's most powerful offices are now only a few words away from becoming viral jokes. And for a country that once prided itself on grace under pressure, that realization hit harder than any headline. Asterisk, if this story made you stop and think, Good. Because moments like this show how easily truth can get buried beneath sarcasm, and how one careless line can shake public trust. Here we don't just chase headlines, we uncover what's hidden behind them. From power plays to press room chaos, every story reveals something deeper about who we are and where we're heading. So, if you crave the truth behind the noise, hit subscribe. Stay with us because the next story might not just shock you, it might change how you see everything.